Are we waiting on some folks?
Yeah, good morning. Just go ahead and I think we're ready to start.
All right. I'll call this meeting to order. This meeting of the Board of Chiropractic Examiners, Government and Public Affairs Committee is being held by teleconference pursuant to the statutory provisions of Government Code Section 11133. The date is Tuesday, October 4, 2022, and the time is 11:01. The board's paramount responsibility is to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the public through licensure, education, enforcement, and chiropractic care. Members of the public may address the committee during the public comment session. Public comments will also be taken on agenda items at the time the agenda is heard and prior to the committee taking on any action on said items. Those who would like to provide public comment will be limited to 3 minutes unless in the discretion of the committee, circumstances require a longer period. Members of the public will not be permitted to yield their allotted time to other members of the public to make comments. Individuals may appear before the committee to discuss items not on today's agenda. However, the committee may not discuss or take action on these items except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda of a future meeting. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. Please turn off or silence all cell phones. We will now take roll. Mr. Sweet, please take roll.
Yes, good morning. Ms. Cruz?
Present.
Raphael Sweet, present.
Thank you. And Ms. Walker, I'm probably going to need some assistance with this being my first meeting kind of as chair. What would be the next steps kind of leading into the next item? Oh, I don't hear you.
This is the moderator. You're probably on mute.
I figured that out. Thank you. Ms. Cruz, after each agenda item, as you move to the next one, you generally just announce and read the title of the next agenda item, and then depending on the point of business, then move to the next step. So in this case, we would be reviewing and possibly approving the June 28th, 2021 committee meeting minutes. And back over to you to open it for discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Like go through my notes here. All right, on to agenda item number 2, review and possible approval of a June 28, 2021 committee meeting minutes. I believe the purpose of this item is for us to review and possible approval. The committee is being asked to make a motion to approve the June 28, 2021 meeting minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the June 28, 2021 meetings.
Oh, I second.
This is Sabina. And then you would, if there's no more discussion, you could go out for public comment and then we'll take the roll call vote.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and go out for a public comment.
This is the moderator. We are now open for public comment on the meeting minutes. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. Let us take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the motion?
Yes, please. All right, Mr. Sweet, please go ahead and call roll for the vote on the motion.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Raphael Sweet? Yes.
All right, vote is taken. All right, let's move. Any next steps before I move on to the next agenda item?
So that motion carries.
That motion carries. Thank you.
We also should call for public comment if possible.
Okay.
Wait, we did that before the vote?
Oh, Yours are right. Thank you.
Let's check. Motion carries. On to agenda item number 3, update on the board's administration program, including budget and fund condition, business modernization and implementation of Connect system, and status of board's pending rulemaking packages. Ms. Walker, could you please provide an update on the board's administration program?
Certainly. So before I dive into the update, I just wanted to begin by briefly providing some background information on the board's administration program. When we talk about the administration program, we're covering all of our administrative, operational, and policy functions of the board, including the budget, legislation, and regulations. The staff of our administrative program, which primarily is the executive staff and our policy analyst, work directly with this committee on policies and procedures, issues raised during the sunset review process, and monitoring the budget, any trends, and then progress towards our strategic plan objectives. As far as this morning, there are a number of items in my update, so I plan to pause between them to allow the committee to ask any questions. And then at the conclusion of my update, I'll open it up again for questions before we move to public comment. So as far as what's going on with the administration program, as far as this week, we're primarily focused on meetings of our committees. Yesterday, the licensing committee discussed proposed changes to the Council on Chiropractic Education accreditation standards. They reviewed a new chiropractic college application, and they discussed current regulations for filing addresses with the board and posting a license or satellite certificate at each place of practice. Then today, of course, we have our Government and Public Affairs Committee meeting. And then on Thursday, we will have the Continuing Education Committee is going to be meeting to continue its discussions on updates to the current continuing education requirements and regulations. And immediately following that meeting, actually within a few minutes after that, the Enforcement Committee will be discussing updates to the record-keeping requirements and disciplinary guidelines. And all of that, in the meantime, preparations are currently underway for our full board meeting scheduled for October 26th and 27th via teleconference. That meeting is going to consist of petition hearings being held on the first day, followed by regular board business, including updates from each of these committees on the 27th. Are there any questions from the committee on our upcoming meeting calendar?
No, but thank you for laying it out for us in the document.
Sure. Okay. Next, I'd like to provide a little bit of a brief update on some recent outreach activities. Dr. Paris and I represented BCE at the Federation of Chiropractic Licensing Boards, known as FCLB, regional meeting of Districts 1 and 4 last weekend. We participated in discussions with most of the states in the western half of the country on various administrative, licensing, educational, and enforcement issues. We'll provide a little bit more information on those discussions at the board meeting, but we did get quite a bit of value out of those, and it did get us thinking about some additional items that may be helpful to work through the committees either later this year or even into 2023. Also on Saturday, we participated in the California Chiropractic Association's Chiropractic Roundtable, where we shared updates on BCE, and then we heard from representatives from Life Chiropractic College West, the Southern California University of Health Sciences, the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, and Cal Chiro. Are there any questions on those activities?
I'm curious to know kind of what specific kind of key areas are you kind of looking at, kind of taking back from the conference?
Sure. Primarily with licensing structures and the ways that other states have, they have different kind of license statuses and reciprocity, and the way they kind of allow for that navigation between state to state. That really got us thinking of some ideas for the licensing committee. And then some of the programs were sharing some of the actions they're taking relating to enforcement and regulation that we think would be very helpful in incorporating with some of our pending workload. So primarily licensing and education issues to take back.
Thank you. Look forward to that.
Next, I'm going to provide an update on our business modernization and Connect system. So this is primarily where a lot of our efforts have been focused over the summer and the fall. Over the summer, we implemented two significant changes to the system for implementation of legislation. First, on July 1st, we added functionality to the system to waive the application and license fees for spouses of active duty military members assigned to duty in California and whose spouses hold a current license to practice in another state as required by Business and Professions Code Section 115.5. Then in August, we implemented the Department of Healthcare Access and Information Health Workforce Data Survey as part of the online renewal process, as we're required to do by Business and Professions Code Section 502. The main focus then this fall is on enhancing the user experience and increasing our system utilization rate. To do that, we're making some significant changes to the applicant and licensee dashboards to make the navigation easier and more intuitive, and by separating content out across different tabs, providing a much simpler layout for users within our system. We're also, from that effort, we're also simplifying the renewal process for the primary DC license type by removing the section that currently requires them to upload documentation of all of their CE prior to being able to proceed to the payment portion of the application. From there, we're also creating a section on the dashboard for licensees to be able to securely store their CE records in the system, and it'll provide access to BCE staff when we're conducting CE audits. In addition, we're prominently displaying links to all of BCE's resources and contact information for each of the units right there on the user dashboard. We expect these enhancements to be ready. Some may be released this week, but primarily looking more towards November. And then from there, we're going to be focusing on spreading the word through our communication channels and likely in a notice included with the license renewal application within the mailing that goes out at the time of renewal to really get the word out to licensees of these changes and help drive traffic to the system. After we kind of get through stabilizing the current suite of offerings that we have for licensees, we're then going to be building out our continuing education functionality, beginning with the CE provider and course approval processes. And then from there, we would be building a front-facing list of all of the board-approved CE courses with the ability for users to go in and search and filter results by items such as the title, the date, the subject area, location, and the provider. Currently, that front-facing list that we have of board-approved CE courses is posted on our website in terms of a 100+ page PDF. So we want to provide something that's much simpler and easier and more useful to our stakeholders. We're also going to be developing the ability for providers to directly upload course completion records to BCE, which thereby would allow for primary source verification of licensees' CE records and eventually and ideally reduce the need for licensees to manually upload and store the records themselves. Instead, it would be system integrated, and it would also significantly reduce the need for the manual CE auditing process that we currently have, because we can allow the system to do a form of a pre-check given that they've already integrated the records that came directly from the providers. All of these changes as they relate to the CE program are expected to be implemented throughout 2023. Are there any questions from the committee on the Connect project?
Just a quick question. I know you said the rollout, you're expecting it in fall of this year. Do we have any specific deadline that we need to meet in terms of compliance legislatively or even for DCA to be rolled out by?
There's no hard deadlines on these efforts for the enhancements. They are getting ready to do a release tomorrow evening. And some of the enhancements are ready. Some of them, they're still in the testing phase and may need to be held until November. But we don't have any legislatively mandated deadlines that we're facing at this point.
Thank you.
I was wondering, and was reading through the board materials, there's multiple other groups that are going through implementation at the same time as us. Are we all on the same schedule, kind of with similar enhancements, or is it kind of we're all going through a similar schedule but on our own path, just as background information?
It's the second one. So we're all on our own. We're all on a fixed schedule of sprints where we're developing different pieces of the system, and then they're doing a coordinated release across the programs. But within each sprint, the content now that each board is focusing on has changed. In many cases, it's been beneficial for us to be part of this program with multiple boards, because we've been leveraging some of the functionality that they've built, and they've been leveraging some stuff that we've built. So we're really at an information sharing point now.
Perfect. And is there another question I had here? And just to clarify, you mentioned after the November release, we're going to kind of navigate we're going to send out communications during the different communication channels. What are the current communication channels? And I imagine this is going back to our strategic plan discussions of what do we currently have, just to kind of put a stake in the ground so we know if we wanted to kind of move beyond that or pilot some along the way.
Sure. So our primary communication channel that we're utilizing right now is the listserv email list that we have, where we send email notifications. We do then have the website and social media, but as we've talked about, part of the strategic plan, those need to be significantly enhanced and kind of retooled. We would use those channels as well to get the information, but those are kind of our options that we have.
Okay, just wanted to thank you. And that's it for me.
So as far as kind of in line with what we're doing with the Connect project, we've been reviewing our existing licensing, CE, and enforcement processes. Staff in the licensing and CE units, they've been conducting a pretty comprehensive review of their existing paper-based processes to identify and remove any unnecessary or duplicative steps, improve their processing times, and prepare for the integration of these processes into the Connect system. Through that effort, additional staff from the other units have been cross-trained in these processes, which is allowing us to better assist our applicants, licensees, and the public when they contact BCE with questions on those processes. As far as the enforcement unit, they've actually been working directly with the department's organizational improvement office to evaluate the complaint intake, desk investigation, and field investigation processes and identify strategies to improve productivity, reduce investigation timeframes, and provide excellent customer service to those that we interact with through the BCE complaint process. The OIO has developed process maps that kind of keep these updates in mind, and then we're using those recommendations from the project and planning to implement them throughout this upcoming year. Are there any questions on any of those processes or even the OIO project?
And for me.
I will go on to the next item. So for the I'll go over the status of some of our proposed regulations. To summarize, basically all of our pending packages at this point are in an internal review process, or they're being developed at the committee level. We don't have anything over that's been noticed and is currently pending within the formal process. A few weeks ago, we did meet with our regulatory counsel to discuss the status of each of the packages and come up with a plan for moving them forward. The main goal behind that plan is really to take the largest packages and group them by singular issues and move them forward in that method, primarily so that we can better inform the public of the changes that are coming, and then for it to be easier for the public to simply understand the rationale and the basis behind each of those proposals. The closest ones to completion at this point are the delegation of authority and the distance learning packages, and those are planned to be forwarded to legal counsel to begin the departmental review process within the next few weeks. Are there any questions about the different pending regulation packages? There are quite a few listed in the meeting materials.
So at this point, then they'll be designated as to whether recommendations as to whether we need to watch them or support them or that sort of thing.
So these are all the board's different regulation packages at different phases. So for the majority of them, the board's already approved the language and they want to move forward. And we're just doing the staff work to implement that. There are some of the packages within that pending workload that, as we're assessing, we're finding some policy issues or questions that weren't maybe addressed that are going to have to go back to the committee for further discussion. But in many of those cases, it's just staff work that needs to move forward.
Some questions I have on the CCR Title 16, Section 364 4, the C exemptions of reduction of requirements, or is it that? Yes, I just wanted to confirm there was no reference to where there would be a definition of natural disaster. I'm just noticing kind of as we're finding places where things need to get further defined. And this is not a today thing, just wanted to confirm that if there's not a place, a definition for that we can at least make sure we point to one.
Yeah, I'd have to double check, but from call, I believe we did define natural disaster by making a reference to the use of that phrase within the statute, so that have a cross reference there. And with that proposal, that one needs to go back to the Continuing Education Committee for further discussion in December.
Mm-hmm. And a question on the proposals related to the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative. It says is to establish, the third line, to establish stricter reporting and disclosure requirements. I likely wasn't kind of around during that time of when this was being discussed. I'm just kind of wondering kind of context behind that.
Sure. So the Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative, CPEI, that is actually, it's been around for quite a while. It initially began as legislation after there were a series of news articles kind of outlining issues with the Department of Consumer Affairs and things that could have basically enforcement issues that had been occurring. And it was about a decade ago. It eventually became legislation to try to implement various different reporting requirements and filing of address type requirements to really strengthen the department's enforcement programs. But ultimately that legislation didn't go through, and then it came down as a recommendation from the department for the boards to implement those ideas through regulation.
Okay.
That package itself is actually rather complex because it then touches a variety of different topics. Mm-hmm. So breaking it down, there are within that context, even though it's currently being branded as an enforcement issue, some of them are actually licensing issues. So that's where we're going to continue breaking down and probably spreading them across even different committees.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Because when I was reading stricter reporting and disclosure requirements, I was thinking in addition to the ones we've already been discussing, and no, it's very much interconnected. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I was concerned about what more are we asking?
Yeah.
And that was it for me in this section.
Great. Okay, let's see. Moving on. So our strategic plan, as you recall, at the August board meeting, the board had participated in that strategic planning session. The draft strategic plan is currently being reviewed by staff, and it's planned to be presented to the board for adoption during the October 27th meeting. And along those lines, on September 13th, the governor actually issued an executive order that requires strategic plans in effect after July of 2023 to be updated to more effectively advance equity and drive outcomes that increase opportunity to all. So in response, the department's currently evaluating its strategic planning processes, and it'll be working with the boards and bureaus early next year on updates to the current plans. So the update I got from the department at this point is to proceed with the plan or with the draft plan that we have in place at the October meeting, and then they'll be working with the board next year to make any necessary updates that may be needed for consistency with this executive order. Any of that work will be going back to this committee for discussion next year.
Is there any kind of indication of timeline around that, if they would think it would happen kind of in a certain part of the year?
So they're setting internal timeframes of late fall into early winter at the internal level for the department to evaluate and come up with recommendations, and they're saying that they're probably going to have updates to the boards by March of 2023. And okay, so the last portion of my update is going to be on the board's budget and fund conditions. So if I could ask the moderator to please display the fund condition statement on the screen. Thank you. And if you could just scroll down just a bit to about the middle of the update of the page. Thank you. So the budget, our current budget statement contains our actual expenditures during the last fiscal year, 2021 to 22, as well as projections for this current year plus 3 out. Those revenue projections are based on the implementation of the fee increases effective January 1st. And when you look at the last fiscal year, you would see that our revenue was about $4.5 million, yet we spent about $4.9 million on operations. And with these, and then looking further out, you can see the fee increase reflected in the total revenues as you see it growing from 4.5 million up to about 4.95, looking a few fiscal years out. As far as those revenue projections, those are based on data that staff provided to the department, and we did err on the side of caution and go with some pretty conservative estimates, just given that we're not sure what that fee impact is going to look like as it relates to the continuing education courses that we receive, just given that fee increase amount that'll be coming. So we did go on the more conservative side when we start looking at those numbers, but our fee bill does provide ability to raise the primary DC license renewal fee as necessary if we get ourselves in a situation where looking a few years out, we are going to need additional revenue. So we see the increase, but then looking at our fund balance, we're in a much more stable state than we were last year without the fee increase. Because although our fund balance is showing a decrease, our months in reserve is now depleting by a little under 1 month per year, whereas we were currently facing insolvency either this fiscal year or next. Let's see. So on that one, as far as like with what we're working on here, staff, we work closely with the department's budget office to monitor the budget. And these expenditures here, I just wanted to point out that this assumes that we spend our entire allotment of resources, which we generally do revert money back to the fund. We didn't do that in the last fiscal year just due to the costs associated with business modernization, as well as a pretty significant increase in the Attorney General's costs. As we had quite a few cases that went to hearings and that had kind of accumulated during COVID. So although we're seeing the decrease, we're going to really be looking closely at this fiscal year's worth of data to realize what if any reversions we're going to have, and then come back to this committee with recommendations on looking further out on the budget. I suspect there's probably quite a few questions on the budget, and I'd be happy to answer them from the committee.
Well, I have a question here. So even though this takes into the account the fee increase, we're still looking at decreasing reserves in the future. Is that right?
That's correct. And that's based on very conservative estimates for revenue for continuing education course application fees. Because if we use the actual data for how many years, we get about 2,000 courses a year, but for these estimate purposes, we cut it significantly down, just knowing that the fee is increasing significantly. So if we get anywhere near what we've gotten in prior years, this fund condition isn't going to look like this. It's going to be, you're going to see the increasing balance. But we're trying, at this point, we're kind of cautiously testing to see what the reaction is going to be as far as the number of applications we're going to receive in response to that fee increase.
So we don't know. Do we know how much variation we can expect? Because it's hard to gauge where we are if this isn't an accurate representation.
It's an educated estimate. I would say at this point we've kind of built in. I believe it was probably it was close to about a 75% decrease in the initial portion of the next fiscal year, and then we studied it out, and I believe we estimated about 60% of our regular levels of receiving the fees or the applications for this data. So that's where we really need to, as we get into early 2023 and we start getting the actual data of the applications received, that's where we're going to have better data for calculating out the next year's. So with these, we certainly aren't going with any estimates that would be overly ambitious where we would be surprised to get less revenue. Really, in this case, they're very conservative estimates, and we expect to actually receive more revenue than what we're projecting at this point.
It also, in the notes, it mentioned that it assumes an interest rate of 1.5%. Do we know, I mean, I know that things have been increasing on that side recently. I don't know how long that's going to continue, but is this something that's kind of department wide, or is this just something that we assumed on this this estimate?
These are the departments department wide standard estimates that they're including in everyone's data models.
Okay. Thank you.
A question I have is, when it comes to a lot of the process improvement opportunities we're finding in Connect, are any of those assumptions put into this, or is it more us staying on the conservative side, not yet including those potential savings?
We've kept it very conservative at this point and have not included that into these estimates. We do expect to realize some efficiencies in actual expenditures through the Connect project. But some instances, when it comes to our budget, as far as our position counts, remain relatively fixed. So the benefit and the efficiency gain there is more from being able to redirect the resources to work on other projects and other beneficial activities. At this point, we have no plans to reduce staff count or anything to that effect as a result of the Connect.
Sorry, I was definitely not assuming any changes to staff count. I was just more assuming kind of things, I would say more, what other words? I would say other costs in terms of efficiencies, but thank you.
Sure. Just to clarify, as far as our primary costs associated when we talk about what we're spending our money on, it comes down to the staff, and then a lot of the other costs are associated with enforcement. So if we can get to the point where we don't have to expend so much money every year at the Attorney General's office on disciplinary actions, or if we find a more effective method of really recovering all of those costs through a new model, that would really that would affect a lot of this. But there are, like you said, there are quite a few smaller changes, like the amount of money spent on things like paper and other things that will eventually decrease as a result of the Connect project.
And kind of similar to the question about interest rate, I'm guessing the general salary, the 4.5 increase, 5.5 increase, is also kind of a standard amount that it's kind of set by the department.
Correct. Yes. It's a general estimate at this point. The committee should note that the majority of the board's employees are in bargaining unit 1 and 4. They're covered by SEIU, and they're getting prepared for the next round of an updated contract. So once that contract's in effect, we're going to know what the actual general salary increases will be. And at that point, it'll allow us to better estimate our costs for staff.
Okay. And then what's a kind of approximate timeline on those negotiations?
I believe they're working on them now for next summer. So I believe at the end of this fiscal year is when we should know what those numbers are going to be. But in this case, they're expecting the 4.55% just for estimating purposes. And then just given inflation, I would suspect that there probably will be increases included in the next contract.
Okay. And then how often are those negotiations normally set to occur?
They're generally about 4-year contracts.
Okay. Thank you. And those are all my questions.
I have one more question, Ms. Walker. So on that same, on the notes there below, it says assuming no payment to the loan, but we have a loan balance of 1.4 million. is that, is it safe to assume that we won't be making any payments on that loan?
At this point, I would, I'll work with the budget office to incorporate payments into the future fund conditions, and we'll make those changes when we bring it back for the full board meeting later this month. At this point, I would say it's safe that we're probably not going to make a payment during this current fiscal year, but we do need to take care of that obligation. So I would like to start seeing the numbers with assuming that we begin making payments during 2023 to 2024.
Yeah, and do you happen to know what the interest rate on that loan is?
I believe that's where the 1.5%. It's a relative
okay.
interest rate, but we are continuing to accrue interest on that balance.
Gotcha. Okay.
And this isn't, I would say, still a comment I would make, and kind of completely understanding, wanting to make sure, one, that we are, what's it called? That the fund itself is in a good place, and that, what's it called, we also kind of repay back the loan. I would just kind of also keep in mind, kind of as you explore that in modeling, kind of the types of conditions that you would want us to be in, the types of conditions you would want the fund to be in when making those, right? So I can see us, right, if we're reaching down to months in reserve to 0.3, right? I'm interested, right? There may be opportunities where we kind of focus on the years where we are in a better situation, but interested to see what comes out of the modeling.
Yeah, and we'll put that model together and bring it to the board. As far as with those payments, we should begin estimating that we're going to make the payments, and then my recommendation would be to then assess. And as we get closer to the end of each fiscal year, so we know what our actual expenditures are, and if we have any reversion, at that point, it's pretty safe that if we're estimating a pretty significant reversion back to our fund, that we should likely then decide to make a payment rather than just revert all the funds back to us. We should probably take a portion of that and start paying down that loan. So that, as far as that concludes the portion of my update as far as the administration program. Ms. Cruz, you may want to open it for public comment at this point on anything covered within the admin update.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, moderator, please open up this item for public comment.
We are now accepting public comment on the update. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. All right, looks like we're good on agenda item 3. Moving on to agenda item 4, update and discussion on legislation. So Ms. Campbell, please provide the staff report on this agenda item.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz. Today, I will be providing you with a brief update on a few bills that pertain to the board. First is Assembly Bill 1102 Low, which was signed by Governor Newsom on September 28, 2022. AB 1102 clarifies that telephone medical advice services are required to ensure all healthcare professionals who provide telephone medical advice from an out-of-state location are operating consistent with the laws governing their respective licenses and to comply with all directions and requests for information made by their respective healing arts licensing boards. This bill also specifies that a telephone medical advice service is required to comply with all directions. In addition, this bill removes the requirement that a telephone medical advice service notifies the Department of Consumer Affairs of changes in their contact information as specified. Are there any questions from the committee on this bill? Hearing none, I'll move on to Assembly Bill 1604, Holden, Chapter 313, Statutes of 2022, which was signed by Governor Newsom on September 13th, 2022. AB 1604 established the Upward Mobility Act of 2022 and makes changes to the law relating to the State Personnel Board and the California Department of Human Resources to provide civil service employees with greater opportunity to move upward within state service through additional accountability and procedural requirements. AB 1604 initially contained specified diversity requirements for volunteer members of state boards and commissions. However, these provisions were removed through amendments in the Senate on August 11th, 2022. This bill no longer has direct impacts on the board, but will impact the recruitment and hiring of state employees. Are there any questions on AB 1604? Hearing none, I'm going to move on to Senate Bill 731, Dorazo, which was signed by Governor Newsom on September 29th, 2022. This bill expands automatic arrest record and conviction relief to additional felony offenses, so long that the conviction does not require registration as a sex offender. Under existing state law, a person is eligible for arrest record relief if they were arrested on or after January 1st, 1973, and the arrest was a misdemeanor and the charge was dismissed, or the criminal proceedings were not initiated within 1 year after arrest, or if the arrest was for a felony punishable in the county jail and criminal proceedings were not initiated within 3 years from the date of arrest. This bill expands the discretionary expungement relief to include felonies where the defendant was sentenced to state prison. However, this relief will not release the individual from the terms and conditions of unexpired criminal protection orders. Are there any questions from the committee on this bill?
Question I have, is there
Mhm.
is there any concern coming from staff on this bill?
The only concern there is the impact it potentially is going to have on our application process and our grounds for denying a license, because what it's doing is it's expanding significantly the arrest and conviction relief. So in that way, it's probably going to affect our ability to deny licenses based on criminal history information. We have less concerns on the licensee information, just given the fact that we actively track them through the arrest and conviction process and promptly file disciplinary actions immediately following. But there are probably some implications on our initial license process that as a result of this bill.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Okay, moving on to Senate Bill 1237, Newman, Chapter 386, Statutes of 2022, was signed by Governor Newsom on September 17th, 2022. The existing law authorizes any licensee whose license expires while the licensee or registrant was on active duty to reinstate the individual's license without examination or penalty if certain requirements are met, such as the licensee or registrant possessed a current and valid license with the board at the time the licensee was called to active duty. The renewal requirements are waived only for the period during which the licensee was on active duty service, and written documentation that substantiates the licensee's active duty service is provided to the board. This bill clarifies the definition of active duty to include active duty in the United States Armed Forces and on duty in the California National Guard. Are there any questions on this bill? Okay. Lastly, we have the Board Sunset Review Bill, SB 1434, Roth, Chapter 623, Statutes of 2022, which was signed by Governor Newsom on September 27, 2022. This bill requires the board to be subject to the sunset review process as if the act were scheduled to be repealed on January 1st, 2027. It requires the board to include the telephone number and email addresses of licensees in the board's directory and requires licensees to immediately notify the board of a change in contact information. SB 1434 removes specified exemptions from the probation status disclosure requirement for licensees placed on probation by the board and includes the updated fee schedule. This bill requires the board to submit a report to the appropriate policy and fiscal community of the legislature that includes an update on the board's license fee structure and whether the board needs to consider plans for restructuring its license fees by January 1st, 2027. So this bill requires action by the board in a few ways. The board will need to begin collecting telephone numbers and email addresses from all licensees beginning January 1st, 2023. Staff will be working with the department to update the renewal form to request this information at the time of renewal. And in addition, some updates may be needed to our legacy database system to store the email addresses. Enforcement staff will be working with the Attorney General's office to ensure the updated probation status disclosure requirement is included in future stipulated settlements. In addition, this requirement will be incorporated in the updates to the disciplinary guidelines that are currently being developed by the board's enforcement committee. And staff will be working with this committee to develop the required report to the legislature on the board license fee structure and whether the board needs to consider plans for restructuring its fees. Are there any questions on this bill? Okay, and with that, I turn this over to the committee for any further discussion or for public comment.
I do have one question. That last part, you mentioned that you'd be working with this particular committee to work on a report. When timeline-wise, when do we anticipate kind of getting into those details?
So my recommendation is, so we're getting through our budget updates that'll be on each committee agenda for this, or each meeting agenda for this committee. But as we get into the fee increase and maybe we make it about a year in, so probably January of 2024, we should start working on kind of evaluating that data and beginning the reporting. Within this bill, they did update that same time frame of January 1st, 2027. Puts us directly in line with our next sunset review report. So as the committee's developing the sunset review report, you're also going to be evaluating these processes and coming up with those recommendations so we can submit that report likely as an additional addendum to our sunset review report.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Moderator, I'd like to open it up to public comment.
We are now accepting public comment on agenda item 4. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to agenda item number 5, review, discussion, and possible recommendations regarding proposed changes to the board's record retention schedule. Ms. Walker, please provide the staff report on this item.
Sure. So the board the board and actually all state agencies are required to manage their records in accordance with policies and procedures established by the California Records and Information Management Program, CalRIM, and then specifically the board follows departmental policies on the maintenance, retention, preservation, and disposal of records. The issue here is that the board's most recent records retention schedule, which is schedule number 2014-01, was filed in 2014 and expired in April of 2019, and therefore must be updated. Most of the updates within the schedule are really something that's handled at the staff level. It's just administrative in nature, such as making sure that we're accounting for all of the records that we currently have, including the Connect system, really accounting for records that at one point were paper and they're now moving towards electronic, and just ensuring that everything's accurate. However, within that schedule, there are a few policy issues that do require some discussion and kind of weighing in by the committee and ultimately the board. The first of which is board meeting minutes. Looking at our current schedule, it's only specifying a retention period for the board meeting minutes of just 27 years. Given the fact that these meeting minutes provide a historical record of all formal action taken by the board, staff recommends increasing this retention period and instead maintaining these records for a total of 100 years. Another issue relates to continuing education records. That last schedule specified a retention period of just 1 year. And the staff recommendation beyond that is to increase the period to 5 years to then align it to the board's auditing period for licensee continuing education course records. What this change will allow us to do is specifically with the course records, it's going to allow us to be able to cross-reference when we're conducting audits of licensee course completion records. It's also very helpful for us during the audit process for us to identify cases where potentially someone has falsified records, or if a provider is continuing to offer courses beyond the approval period. And the third and probably the most important one, actually the most important one probably is the board meeting minutes, but the second most important one here for the committee's discussion today is the disciplinary case files. Our last schedule specified a retention period for our disciplinary case files, which are identified as administrative cases within that schedule, including revocation and surrender of license of just 25 years. This timeframe is problematic for the fact that a former licensee could potentially either file a new application for licensure or petition the board for reinstatement of their revoked or surrendered license after that disciplinary case file has been destroyed. Therefore, the staff recommendation on this item is to increase the retention period for disciplinary case files that result in revocation or surrender of a license from 25 years to 75 years. So today, the committee is really asked to discuss their current retention schedule and the staff recommendations and consider making a motion to the board.
Some questions that I had, I'll start with the board meeting minutes one, is the going from 27 to 100 was a big jump. Just wondering, what are the other healing arts board? Is it kind of similar on the same kind of amount of time? It just seemed pretty random.
So the 100-year time frame is really the maximum that they allow us to specify within the retention schedule. And then looking at some of the other boards, there are quite a few that do keep that 100-year time frame for board meeting minutes, just given the relevance and historical record that they provide.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Sweet, do you have any questions? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I assume that these changes in terms of going from 25 to 75 years or even to 100 years, as Ms. Cruz specified, can be done pretty easily just because of, electronic storage, that this is, maybe 15 to 20 years ago, they would have been storing this in some storage facility, and now we're able to do it all electronically. Is that the case?
That's the long-term goal for the records. What we currently have in place right now is those records are stored in paper, but the Connect system allows us to store them electronically. So future records after July 1st of 2022 are now electronic records. And then we're also working on a remediation kind of process to where we can, the challenge we currently have when it comes to our records is you have to identify a secure storage before you can completely purge underlying paper files. So our current departmental kind of storage system that we have doesn't meet the specified requirements by law. So we're going to be exploring any other software options that might be available to us, including potentially some form of within the Connect system to meet those requirements. And then we'd like to go paperless instead of keeping paper as we have in the current schedule.
Yeah. So which I think is the right way to go. Given that we haven't established all that, is there an additional financial burden to implement this stuff?
It wouldn't be significant. We do pay a nominal fee each month for when we store records at the State Records Center. They do charge us a fee based on the utilization of space within that warehouse. But the volume of revocations and license surrenders per year is really about 10 to 15. So it's one more box per year. It's not going to significantly affect our expenses. And then as we do move towards paperless, we can then start pulling those records back and eliminating them from that paper storage.
And I'm assuming the, what's it called? You said you had to find a secure, what's it called? What did it want? I blank on the term you used, but when you go from, when you're going from paper to electronic, would it not be with, the same, kind of agency, or would you be working with a third party to kind of have those records managed or stored electronically?
It would probably involve us, it's going to involve us working with the department to identify some sort of software platform that allows for meeting that. So it would likely be a third-party contract with a particular software product that allows us to do that. Currently, we don't have the ability with electronic files to effectively organize and index them and retrieve them. So we need to identify that type of system and implement that in the coming years so that we can truly go paperless.
Is this a agency-wide, would it be like an agency-wide approach, or is this specific to our board?
It's specific at this point. It's specific to each of the programs. There are other programs within the department that do have that type of software in place. DCA as a whole, and actually the state government as a whole, is really moving towards paperless. So we'll keep an eye on that to see if they implement something on a broader scale. But at this point, it would be at the board level.
Okay. Any other questions on this item? Or sorry, not this item, on the board meeting minutes.
So, Ms. Walker, just to clarify, so our role now is just to decide whether we will bring this to the full board?
Correct. Staff is seeking approval basically by the board for us to increase these retention timeframes within the new schedule. Given the fact that they are policy in nature and they do have implications, particularly the disciplinary case records. That's why we're bringing it before the committee and then ultimately the board for approval. It's not something that we feel is a decision that we can just make at the staff level without the board's input and approval. With those disciplinary records, by increasing the retention period from 25 to 75 years, that is going to affect also the public disclosure and records access of those files. Because right now, if we're purging them after 25 years, at year 26, the public can't get access to them. But by us increasing that in 50 years, if there's a PRA, the public will have access to those documents.
They are PRA-able. Okay.
Okay, well, I have no objection to taking it to the full board and making that recommendation.
Me neither.
This is Sabina, if I might chime in. So would need a motion to recommend to the full board those specific changes, and if we could have those specific changes stated in the motion.
Oh wait, are we going one by one, or are we saying overall across all three items?
If your recommendation or your motion is to recommend all three changes, then those can be captured in one motion.
Okay, then I'll make a motion to, recommend the proposed changes to the retention period to the full board? Would that be an appropriate motion?
Correct, and the changes would include extending the board meeting minutes record retention to 100 years, extending the continuing education records to 5 years, and extending the disciplinary case files to 75 years. You can say so moved.
So moved. So moved.
So then, do we get a second?
So I made the motion.
Oh,
Right.
And then I first. And then
So that would be Ms. Cruz, you'd be the second, right?
I would second. Okay, then I second. Thank you.
Right. And then we could do public comment and then we can have a vote. Thanks.
We are now open for public comment on the motion. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. Let us take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the motion?
Yes, please. All right, Mr. Sweet, please take roll call on the vote.
Ms. Cruz,
Yes.
Raphael Sweet, yes.
Right. So moved. Or the motion carries. Sorry, I'm getting used to this. Thank you, everyone. Motion carries. Let's move on to agenda item number 6. We will review its review, discussion, and possible recommendations regarding the onboarding process for new board members. Ms. Campbell, please provide a staff report on this item.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz. The committee is asked to review and discuss the current onboarding and orientation process for new board members and to consider whether any changes are necessary to better support new members. The Board Member Administrative Procedure Manual currently states that within 6 months of appointment, the new board member is to travel to the board office in Sacramento for orientation with the executive officer and one board member who has been assigned by the board chair. The items to discuss should include introductions to staff, review of staff roles and responsibilities, the administrative processes, historical information, and overall expectations. And that's where it currently is at. So if the committee would please discuss if there should be any changes or updates to the Board Member Administrative Procedure Manual for the onboarding process. And with that, I turn it back over to you. Thank you.
So how would we like to approach this? So is there a preference for us just to give our thoughts on kind of on the background information provided, or?
So we can handle this one of two ways. Both of the members of today's committee are actually some of our more recent board members. So you can begin maybe by reflecting on kind of your experiences and if you felt that was sufficient, or if there's other ways you would recommend that we enhance the process. If it would be helpful to kind of facilitate discussion, I can also share a few ideas at the staff level before those discussions begin.
So what was outlined here is the current onboarding and orientation policy?
Correct. What's contained in the meeting materials is the onboarding process that the board had developed and placed within the administrative procedure manual. As far as on the staff perspective on it, there's the idea is we want to make sure that onboarding process is effective for new board members. And if there's anything further that we can do to help facilitate and ease their transition onto the board, that's where we would like to support the board, and we can consider changes to that manual to reflect a more updated process.
I can start, at least kind of going through my being, I would say, the most recent kind of grouping of board members. In looking at, well, at least in looking at the policy itself, it mentions orientation and onboarding meetings with the EEO and one board member. I do recall I did have a meeting. There was a meeting, I believe, what's it called, Dr. Paris. It was on the phone because it was COVID times. And I think what was missing for me in that kind of orientation, it felt more like a meet and greet versus an orientation where you would have specific things to go over of these are the different committees, these are the different, right, these are the different things kind of that each committee is responsible for. This is, I would say, quote unquote, their outputs, right? This is kind of these are, even as someone who does not have a medical practice or a chiropractic practice, even kind of going so far out to information of this is we are under the Department of Consumer Affairs, and these are the different associations we work with in the chiropractic community. These are the different schools we work with in chiropractic, right? Colleges we work with. Even understanding, I would say, that overall ecosystem in that orientation, right, of the chiropractic practice and administrative community would be very helpful when first coming on. So when it comes to that initial orientation, having being able to, it's similar to when you have a what's it called, new job, and you go and you have that meeting with the new boss and they kind of show you the org chart, right? What I imagine is an org chart well beyond DCA, right? But of all kind of the other agencies and I would say institutions that interplay into what we have to kind of keep in our minds of to consider, right? Of, do we need to consider what CCE, right, is doing when it comes to, and what is their role in all of this, right? And it may be a lot of information, but they at least kind of have that, whether it be a visual or at least kind of something on a slide, something to go back to. So one, for me, understanding the ecosystem, understanding the roles of the different committees, and even the board member binder. I recall receiving information in through email that I printed out, but I don't recall receiving a binder, because as we were going through different board meetings over the past couple months, like, I'm keeping all the extra handouts I'm receiving, like things related to kind of disciplinary action, right? And what are the extremes of the disciplinary action? Like, something like that would be very helpful up front, especially if we're expected to do a mail vote, right out the bat. So I would say that type of context in terms of the ecosystem. What did I say? I already lost count, but the ecosystem of who we're working with, the board member materials. And I think my last one for me would be clear deadlines of all that upfront onboarding stuff. I probably had about 3-4 people emailing me at the same time asking for a combination of different and the same documents. And so I had to create my own checklist document of, like, this is what's due, this is when it's due, you have to get this one, I can't even think of the word right now, but I had to get this one, or it's stamped. Give me the word.
Um,
Notarized?
Notarized?
Thank you. I was like, there's a stamp involved. Yes, right. This one has to be notarized and it has to be submitted by this date. And then, I would say I went even 2 months thinking my start date was one date, which is then connected to a due date of another thing. But to my surprise, my start date was 2 weeks after that date. So I would say a lot of that, I know I said a lot in this short window of time, but a lot of that was kind of a lot providing that type of information, that type of packaged material to a new board member would be helpful, kind of, right, to just get them up and running where kind of they're not chasing the material. So hopefully I kind of move some cobwebs around in your memory, Mr. Sweet, of it's been a while since your onboarding window.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, yeah, I'm trying to jog my memory on it too. One of my questions, because like you mentioned, the definitely don't remember doing the initial meeting in person. So I don't know if there's something in the policy that we're going to continue to allow, new board members to do it remotely somehow, because it's obviously mentioned in person. For someone like me in Southern California, that's a bigger commitment to fly up to Sacramento to make that happen. I don't know if we're anticipating any other folks from Southern California versus closer to the capital. That was one of the things that stuck out to me. And yeah, I think Ms. Cruz's point about just an understanding of the stakeholders that are involved. That obviously there's an org chart, and we kind of get a sense for who we're working with at DCA and at BCE, but yeah, there's also discussion that comes up with stakeholders and other people that have input or want to provide input to the chiropractic industry. So something like that. Do we have anything, any sort of any of this information formalized in any way in terms of, you know, administrative processes or historical information about the board? Do we have any materials on that at this point, or is that just kind of all verbal?
So for the majority of the orientations, a lot of that was delivered verbally. The binder itself kind of is kind of a compilation of just various materials, but there's definitely improvements there and kind of ways to maybe streamline or to put it into just more cohesive, you know, one straightforward, easy to understand material that could be provided. From the staff perspective, I would share that we could probably, you know, we will work directly with the department's board and bureau relations once we get these materials ready. And it would probably be helpful if those not only come from us when the board member comes on board, but if they can also share them up front as they're going through the process and getting somebody onboarded as well. And Mr. Sweet, to your point about the in-person meetings, my personal recommendation would be to move away from that text. I know, you know, with board members, it's very busy and stiff. It's a lot more of a commitment to come out to Sacramento and do a meeting versus what we're doing here today, where you're just on a video conference and we can schedule some time and have a discussion. So while, you know, we're certainly open and welcome to welcoming board members into our office, I think giving them the flexibility to be able to have these types of discussions by video conference could be just as effective. And Ms. Cruz, to your point about some of the different setting the kind of the environment and understanding the different organizations, I see where there's certainly room for improvement there. And on the, as far as the staff perspective, some of the ideas that we had come up with, and I'm curious to hear from the committee on, is one, I think starting with those onboarding meetings, is it helpful to do one all at once? Is it more helpful if we break it into pieces with maybe 2 or 3 so you can kind of have a 1-hour meet and greet, but then kind of follow it with more of a structured orientation? Or would you want that all at once? And then 2, would it be helpful if beyond just kind of getting staff on the line, but maybe we could explore, you know, if getting our legal counsel on the line as well when we start getting into issues relating to the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, some of the disclosure requirements and things about the disciplinary process when you're evaluating mail votes. So I just kind of wanted to throw those ideas out for discussion as well.
I really like those ideas of what's it called, separating it, right? Because I do see the point, and I do see kind of the importance of that meet and greet session. What's it called? So if there's a clean way, right, to section it off, where like for like topics, I also like the idea of having kind of counsel on the line, just to be able to answer some of the questions. I had a lot of questions about the Bagley-Keene Act in the beginning. I also had questions on what's it called, even with the mail vote items of, right, how do I ask questions? Am I not allowed to ask questions? I have to write it on the document, right, that were provided, right? Only then should I do it that way? So I would say there's a lot of, I would say, initial questions that could be kind of cleared up. And even if there could be another board member, right, as optional, I would not kind of require it, but even just to kind of bring up the, oh, you might want to know about this type topics. Just some initial ideas. Any additional kind of thoughts, Mr. Sweet?
I don't think so. I mean, I like Ms. Walker's recommendations and yours as well. So I think, I guess my question is just, what's the aim at this point is just to create a little bit more potential revision on this policy?
Correct. Yeah, we'll work on updates to the policy. I think we'll bring back recommendations and more concrete ideas to the next discussion on this item before we move to formally updating the policy. It would, at the point of where we've kind of cleaned up the process, we come up with some recommendations on improving it. At that point, they should go to the board. But at this point, staff is just taking feedback from the committee so we can develop those items. One additional item I'd like to add to the discussion is, Ms. Cruz, you mentioned fielding requests from multiple staff for just varying items and sometimes repetitive. So one other thought that we had was really pairing, introducing the board member to a primary point of contact from the board staff and filtering all requests through that person so that you're not tracking down emails from names that you may or may not even know. And option is also considering pairing up a board member with another member on the board to maybe act as maybe a mentor or just a resource for all the questions that may come up. So someone that can kind of, we could probably integrate them within the orientation process, but then that board member, the new member would have kind of a point of contact that they could kind of reach out with any questions and have those discussions as items.
Yep. No, that would be great. Thank you. And actually, question, is there any kind of timeline, and I'm not sure if this is the right place for it, but it does say new board members. Is there any timeline on kind of outreach being done currently for new board members? Since we are, I believe, down a position or two.
We do have the two vacancies, which is what makes the discussion on our onboarding process very timely, because ideally we'd like to make some of these improvements right away so that when we do welcome new members, we can implement them. At this point, we haven't had any word of new appointments. We do have the two vacancies, and the department did just fill the Board and Bureau Relations Deputy Director position. Right. So that likely should assist us in getting more appointments either late this year or probably early next year.
All right, thank you. Since we didn't have specific, I would say, edits to the policy, but mainly kind of questions and discussion, does this require a motion?
This is Sabina. No, the staff has been taking notes, and like Ms. Walker already indicated, that they're going to come back with something a little bit more specific and concrete to present. But you can do public comment.
Yep. Perfect. All right, thank you. Moderator, can we please open for public comment?
We are now open for public comment on agenda item 6. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3, raise your hand. We will call on people in order of requests. Let us take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. All right, thank you. No motion is required on this particular item, so we can move on to agenda, excuse me, item number 7, public comment for items not on the agenda. Ms. Walker, are there any written comments that we've received for this agenda item?
No, we have not received any written comments from the public.
All right. So I'm about to open it up for public comment. I'd like to inform members of the public that they may address the committee at this time. We ask that you identify yourselves. Identifying yourself is completely voluntary, and your name will be recorded and in the official minutes if it is provided at the time of their comment. So please, moderator, open it up for public comment.
We are now open for public comments for items not on the agenda. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. All right, let's move on to agenda item number 8, future agenda items. All right, opening up to the committee, is there any items that we wish to put on a future agenda? Not this time. All right, me neither. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the moderator to open up for public comment.
We are opening for public comment one final time, future agenda items. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take another 15 seconds to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. All right, on to agenda item number 9, adjournment. So I want to thank everyone for kind of their time and energy and all their work that went into today's meeting. I'd like to adjourn this meeting. The time is 12:21. Thank you, everyone.